For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. I want to give you an insane hypothetical scenario that seems like the worst game ever of Mad Libs, but just go with me on this one. With the second pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, the Washington Commanders drafted this man right here, LSU quarterback Jayden Daniels. And the reason that the Commanders drafted him was rather obvious. By drafting him, they hope that he can improve the team and improve their quarterback position. That's the reason you sign anyone or draft anyone. You hope that by bringing the person on, you can get better and accomplish your goal. And now that the talks between his agent and the team have finalized, and everything's worked out, Daniels is flying up to DC to sign a contract to officially play in the NFL and become a Washington Commander. On the flight up to DC, it's one of those planes with 3 seats on each side, and Daniels is in the middle seat. To his right is one of his closest friends, who's coming up to DC with him to be there when he signs the contract. To his left is a stranger who happens to be a Broadway producer. On the flight, Daniels is talking with his buddy the entire time, and is cracking jokes and making him laugh and is being an entertainer of sorts. Not in an obnoxious sort of way, where you just wish the person would shut up on the flight, but in a way that's engaging, and in a way where he's telling incredible stories and incredible jokes one after the other. As the flight lands, the Broadway producer sitting next to Jayden Daniels says, "I gotta tell you, man, I was listening to your conversations on the flight, and you seem like an incredible guy. You're so funny and so charismatic. I could have heard you talk for hours. I want to offer you a one-man Broadway show to just go up there and do whatever you want." Keep in mind that Daniels has no acting experience whatsoever. Maybe he was in some local commercials, but that's about it. Daniels was about to sign a contract to play in the NFL and play football. And now, here's this guy coming in out of nowhere, right as he's about to head to the team facility to sign the deal, and he's offering him a Broadway show. Because that's clearly how these things work. Clearly, this is something that happens. Speaking of things that happen, we talk every day on this channel about the weird and wacky history of the NFL, and things that happen in this league that seem way too absurd to believe. Like whatever the heck this story is. So if you like that sort of stuff, be sure to hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel, because we post every single day, and we're really trying to hit 60,000 subscribers. So hit that subscribe button, and thanks in advance for your support. Well, I bring this hypothetical scenario up with Jayden Daniels because, as ridiculous as that sounds, and as absurd as this might seem, I kid you not, something like this actually happened. 1920s football was a vastly different time period and a vastly different breed of football. And this story can be summed up with the mantra of life comes at you fast. One day, you think you're about to sign a contract to play in the NFL and play professional football. The next, as you're on your way to sign the contract, someone offers you a contract to do a show on Broadway for seemingly no reason whatsoever. But in 1926, with Brooklyn Lions offensive lineman Jim Bond, that's exactly what happened. And this is the story behind one of the strangest contract sequences in NFL history, and the bizarre incident that deserves a deep dive nearly a century later. Now, before I talk about what happened with Jim Bond and this entire saga, a few housekeeping items to note. Number one, as you can probably expect because this story takes place in the 1920s, there's not a lot of footage available, so we're relying heavily on still photographs here. Number two, the main team in our story is the Brooklyn Lions, and unsurprisingly, there are no Lions helmets around, so we're just rolling with this Jaguars backdrop for now. And number three, I can assure you, this story is 100% real. I actually have to preface that by saying that, because this is one of the most absurd things I've ever covered on this channel. With that out of the way, let's get into it. The year is 1926, and there's a new team about to enter play in the National Football League. That team is the Brooklyn Lions. Now, there's a lot of controversy surrounding the Lions and their saga with entering the NFL, and the 1926 season for the Lions was absolutely absurd, with the short version of it being that two teams were playing in Brooklyn at the same time, with the Lions playing in the NFL and the Brooklyn Horsemen playing in the rival American Football League, before the two teams realized that they were cannibalizing the same market and it wasn't working out. Thus, the two teams merged in the middle of the season and became the Brooklion Horsemen. Seriously, the Brooklion Horsemen. At least with the mergers of the 1940s during World War II like Hard Pit and the Steagles, the mergers happened because of a shortage of players due to wartime, and they happened before the season started. This was just because of poor planning all the way around. However, that's beside the point. The point is that with the Lions being a brand new team, and with the Lions having an owner in this man right here in Eddie Butler, who was willing to spend whatever it took to build a winner, seeing as he spent a crap ton of money to outbid the Horsemen of the rival AFL for the rights to play at Ebbets Field, the Lions obviously needed players. You can't have a team without players. And they were going to stop at nothing to acquire the best pro football team possible that money could buy. And Butler had someone in mind who he thought could help out the Lions. And that was this man right here, Jim Bond. Bond was definitely on the older side of things, relatively speaking, seeing as he was 32 years old, and he hadn't played football in forever, but Butler wanted him to badly be a part of this team. Bond was a solid player at Pitt, playing there from 1915 until 1920, with a 2-year gap in 1917 and 1918 due to enlisting in the military for World War I. Following his playing days, Bond coached for a little bit at various institutions, and at one point was even the athletic director at Albright College, a school in Pennsylvania that currently resides in Division III. And it seems as though by this point in 1926, that Bond's time in athletics was done. After spending his whole life in athletics in some capacity, whether that was playing, or coaching, or being an athletic director, Bond was now working in the spring and the summer of 1926 with a refining company in Pittsburgh. It was time to move on to another chapter in his life. Or at least, that was the plan before Butler contacted him and wondered if he wanted to play professional football. Now, what Butler saw in Bond by this point, I have no clue, because again, the man was in his mid-30s and hadn't played in 6 years. But Butler clearly saw something and wanted Bond to be on the Lions as an integral part of the offensive line. And he did sign with them. And with that, just days before the season was set to kick off, and the Brooklyn Lions were going to play the Providence Steamroller in their first game of the season, the main man of our story, Jim Bond, was set to take the train from Pittsburgh to New York and sign on the dotted line and officially sign his first professional football contract. And that's where things get really freaking weird. Because you would think in a normal world that this would be a complete non-story and a non-event, right? Man takes the train to sign a contract and go to work. However, a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum, or should I say, Brooklyn. Because Bond was on the train with some friends of his, and while on the train, Bond was engaging in some conversation, as one does with friends. Bond was telling some stories, sharing some jokes, and just having a good time. And it wasn't just his friends who were paying attention to him. It was also some other people who were absolutely fascinated by him. These people could listen to Bond talk all day. The train ride from Pittsburgh to New York was not long enough in their eyes. Bond had an ability to tell stories and captivate people. And these strangers in question were occupied the entire train ride just listening to the man speak and engage in conversation. And turns out, these strangers weren't just ordinary folk with regular jobs. These strangers were theater managers, as in theater managers on Broadway in New York City where the train was heading. Now, we don't know what these people were doing on the train from Pittsburgh to New York, but we do know that these managers resided in New York because they worked for Broadway, and that was the theater capital of the country and maybe even the world at the time. Heck, you could argue that it still is to this day, although West End might have an argument, but that's beside the point. Anyway, these managers were so captivated by listening to Jim Bond the entire train ride that they had an idea. They knew he was on his way to New York to sign a football contract. They kind of got the gist of that based on the entire train ride conversation. But what if he didn't do that? What if we got him to change career paths? What if, and hear me out on this, we sign him instead and we decide to give him his own one-man show on Broadway? Seriously, I kid you not, this was an actual thing that happened. Jim Bond had no acting experience whatsoever. Odds are, if you're watching this video right now, you had more acting experience than Jim Bond did just by virtue of being in an elementary school play. But apparently, these managers liked Bond so much that they wanted to give him his own show right here on Broadway. And as you might be able to guess, there are just a few small problems with how insane this idea is. Number one, how someone interacts with their friends is very different from how someone interacts in other environments. Someone might have all the charisma in the world with people they're close with, but put them on a stage by themselves with no one to feed off of and with an audience full of strangers, and it's very different. It's not like hearing someone sing live and then giving them a record deal. This is a completely different environment. Number two, you don't know this person. You don't know them at all. You might think you know them well enough after one train ride, where they were just talking with some friends, and you overheard the conversation, and you feel like you're one of the guys, but you don't. You have an idea of them, but not the real them. It's like when you're at a bar and you're head over heels for a girl because you're listening to her talk with her friends, and you think she's funny and has a great voice, but you're not a part of the conversation, and you have no idea how she actually is. You don't know her personality at all. Number three, an entire Broadway show is very different from talking with friends where you have inside jokes and don't need to explain things and provide the necessary context. A few anecdotes here and there with your buddies for a couple of minutes and a few quips is not the same as a 2-hour-long, one-man Broadway show, and everyone with the brain knows that. And of the many problems with this plan involving Jim Bond, and I don't know, it might be nitpicking, there might not be that many problems with this plan, but of the many, there is one that stands out, and that is, oh yeah, who the heck thought that this would be a good idea? Seriously? How desperate are you, and how desperate is your theater during the Roaring 20s that you think it's a good idea to give a Broadway show to a man who has no acting experience, who never gave any indication whatsoever that he wanted to be on Broadway, and who you don't even know that well? You listen to him on one train ride, and you think that's enough to give him his own Broadway show and headline a theater and sell out audiences every single night? What kind of a plan is this? I don't know how Broadway worked back in the 1920s and how shows came to be. But today, the process is a long, insane, tedious adventure that takes years. It takes acquiring funds. It takes convincing so many people that this can work. It takes workshops upon workshops upon workshops. It takes a ton of script revisions and marketing and everything. There was a whole TV show with a huge cult following about how a show gets to Broadway. I can assure you, it was not like this, because for a show to be conceived and executed on one singular train ride with a random stranger who you did not know? How was this ever going to work? How is this real life? This is the most unrealistic thing I have ever heard of in NFL history that is true. Nothing about this story makes any sense. It defies gravity. It defies logic. But now, I kid you not, for some crazy reason, Jim had to make a decision after the train ride between signing with the Brooklyn Lions or having a career on Broadway. Because that makes sense. It'd be like if I was editing this video, and without even applying, I just got offered a job at NASA to become an astronaut. You thought Troy Bolton's dilemma in the High School Musical series was unrealistic? That was freaking Saving Private Ryan compared to this somehow real-life situation. And to the surprise of no one, even though Bond was offered a Broadway contract, shocker, Bond turned it down. Because of course he did. I don't think he woke up that day on his way to sign a contract with the Lions, thinking that he was going to wind up headlining a one-man show on Broadway. I don't think he was going to sign with the strangers he just met. It kind of caught him off guard, especially because he had no acting experience and no previous desire to pursue this career. And even after the 1926 season, when Bond never played pro football again, Bond did not get that show on Broadway, as he pursued other careers like being a baseball umpire and working as a treasurer. But his days as an actor were short-lived, if they ever were lived at all. Now look, there are plenty of athletes and plenty of players in the NFL who went on to have very successful careers in theater afterwards. Eddie George is an incredible actor. Nnamdi Asomugha was on Broadway. It can be done, and I love when people find their passion in their second career and have an incredible career under the lights. I love when guys do theater. But there's a massive difference between that, where all those people clearly wanted to do it, had a plan, audition, and played a role in an already existing show or premise, and whatever the heck happened with Jim Bond, where he was just randomly offered a one-man Broadway show because he was funny interacting with his friends on a train ride. The 1920s truly were a different time period, because in September of 1926, Jim Bond wanted to hear the roar of the Lions crowd more than the roar of the Broadway crowd. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.